The domains of dread of Ravenloft are a miserable place full of evil monsters and evil people, as evidenced in my recent minor villains you may want to include in a Ravenloft campaign. These aren't Darklords necessarily, but people who can leave their domains, because Darklords can't, and cause havoc and chaos in multiple places, multiple times in your campaign, potentially. And to counteract the evil, I thought I would also do a video that talked about good NPCs. Some of the good guys, the allies that the players can make as they go through. There's obviously quite a few already listed in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft for 5th edition. The big hitters such as Dr. Rudolph van Richten, Esmeralda d'Avenir, and the Weathermay-Foxgrove twins, to name just a few. I'm going to be looking at ones that are from old Ravenloft novels and old Ravenloft lore as well, who I've come across either by reading the novels or just doing the research on places like Mistipedia, and thought, hey, that'd be cool to add in. Because as much fun as it is to invent NPCs from scratch, I'm a fan of borrowing what's already there and what's already theme appropriate and tweaking that accordingly. I kind of cheated. I've said there are 9. There's actually 10 or 11. I think it's 11, because 2 of them are paired. So one of the points I make is actually 2 brothers. And another point I make, I think, is 2 characters. You could either use one or the other or both. So it's actually 11, not 9. And the word good is probably doing some heavy lifting. I would say some of them are probably like neutral. I probably should have said like non-evil NPCs, but then that doesn't sound much different to the other videos. So I wanted to make it clear this is kind of like the what do they call it? Yin and yang. This is like the other side of that minor villains video. Greetings, fellow Mist Wanderers. My name is Steve Morgan, and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. As mentioned just now, I've leaned on a lot of sources, so there will be old Ravenloft novels, and a warning that any novel I talk about is potentially spoilers for that novel, so you have been warned. There's a couple that are mentioned in the Ravenloft Gazetteers. There's a resource I got on the DMs Guild called Champions of the Mists. I believe this was 2nd edition, maybe 3rd. Heroes of Light is an old Ravenloft resource as well. And there's one person from 5th edition in the Ravenloft Mist Hunters Adventures, the Adventurers League stuff. All of them should appear on Mistipedia, so you don't necessarily need to buy the old resources or dig them out. You should be able to get enough information on Mistipedia to do them justice, except for the one that's currently 5e. And I'll be honest, half of them I discovered while making this video. I had initially about 3 or 4 who I discovered through the novels, and they'll probably be some of the ones I cover off first. And then I was like, I don't want to just do a video that's like 3 or 4 people you can add. And then I did some digging and found some more. So some of these are people that are new to me as of making this video, and because of discovering them, I'm like, I might add them to my campaign now. So that's quite cool. Let's get started with number 1, Brother Dominic. Now, Brother Dominic appears in 2 places that I know of, but possibly more. He appears in the resource Champions of the Mists. I'll link to that in the description. It's available on the DMs Guild, where it gives information about various NPCs, good NPCs you can add to a game. There's Larissa Snowmain and Alnick Ray, who both also appear in Van Richten's Guide. And then I was surprised to see Brother Dominic in there, who I already knew because I read the novel Tapestry of Dark Souls. Tapestry of Dark Souls is about an evil tapestry that Brother Dominic and his fellow brothers, put in my notes Dom and Bros, Dominic and other brothers, I think it's essentially possibly the start of the Order of the Guardians, which is also mentioned in Van Richten's Guide. But they are responsible for keeping this evil tapestry at bay and stopping people from, getting sucked into it. Or it's been a while since I read the novel, or using it for their own nefarious purposes, potentially. And a couple of them are killed in the novel, spoilers. And one of the survivors is Brother Dominic. And then looking at Mistipedia, it says he goes on to do other things after leaving the monastery that gets destroyed in the process, I think. In terms of role-playing him, comes across as quite serious, but also very kind and friendly. He's just generally a good dude. And in terms of adventures, the monastery he was in that got destroyed was in Markovia, but it's not the one from Neither Man Nor Beast, which I talked about in my other Markovia video. And then I noticed on Mistipedia it said at one point he has adventures in Haslan, so Haslan could be a good place to add him. Failing that, there is a base, I think, for the Order of the Guardians in Darkon, so you could potentially add him to Darkon. My players might be going to Haslan soon, so I'm thinking, can I add him to Haslan? So it's kind of appropriate to the old lore. In terms of stat blocks, if you want something a little bit weaker, maybe Priest from the Monster Manual, but if you want something stronger, He is potentially like high up, even the leader of the Order of the Guardians now. You consider the War Priest, which is from Volo's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse, and maybe give him a quarterstaff instead of a mace to tie into his art. I should have mentioned as well, he is described as being a monk, but I think they mean more sort of like the cleric style monk, not the, martial arts style monk. But that could be another interesting angle as well, or instead. Number 2, the Nuikin brothers, Aurek and Dmitri. I loved these two characters when I read the novel Scholar of Decay, and there's plenty of ways to tie them into your game. They are from Borka, so you'll notice if you look at the map and the information for Borka in Van Richten's guide, the Nuikin family is one of the families alongside the likes of the Baritzis and the Delisniers and a few others. In the story Scholar of Decay, there's two brothers, Aurek and Dmitri. Aurek is the oldest, Dmitri's the youngest, and they've got about 4 or 5 sisters in between. So there's a big age gap between them. I think it's 15 years. Aurek is a mage, a wizard, and he's very serious. And Dmitri, I think he's only described as being in like his early 20s, is more of a swordsman and more sort of easygoing and friendly and lighthearted, especially contrasted with his brother. The story goes that he gets the attention of Ivana Baritsi, who's one of the 2 Dark Lords of Borka. And so when Aurek says he needs to go to another domain to look into something, Dmitri tags along to obviously get away from that potentially scary predicament involving Ivana. Aurek's goal is to go to Richten. Apologies for massacring the pronunciation of that. I'm notorious for pronouncing things wrong in my videos. He is looking for a way to resurrect or bring back his wife, who's trapped in a statue. And so Dmitri comes along for the ride and gets sucked up with all of the sort of politics and all the manipulations of the Renier family, with Jacqueline Renier being the Darklord of Richten. There's actually Louise, who's briefly mentioned in Van Richten's guide, who is Jacqueline's sister, starts a relationship with Dmitri, but Dmitri is probably being, you find out that Dmitri's being manipulated and things like that. In terms of role play, as I've just mentioned, Aurek, I'd play him as being very cold, very serious. He's on a quest, he's got his mission in his mind. Dmitri, on the other hand, is friendly, charming nobleman, but very naive and easily manipulated. Adventures-wise, you could have a lot of fun with this. You could potentially include them either pre or post-story in terms of Scholar of Decay, the novel. Perhaps they are met before they go to Richten and Dmitri has to be saved from Ivana, potentially. Maybe it's after the story, the events of the story unfold and they leave Richten right at the end and it's presumed they go back to Borka. Maybe they're met after all the events in Richten have happened, or maybe it's mid-story. Maybe you run Richten and your characters, your players meet the Nuikin brothers, whether that's Aurek or Dmitri, or meet both of them, but meet one before they meet the other potentially. Maybe they help Aurek in his quest to try and help his wife. Stats-wise, for Aurek, maybe the Mage stat block from the Monster Manual, or if you want something a bit more powerful, the Evoker Wizard from Volo's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse. I'd include some spells like Burning Hands and Fireball. I think he casts both of those during the events of the novel. For Dmitri, probably a noble or a veteran, both from the Monster Manual, because he is described as being quite a capable swordsman. Number 3, Elaine Clairn. Elaine appears in the novel Death of a Darklord, which is set in Cartacus. And she's briefly mentioned in the Ravenloft Gazetteer number 1 as well. In the story, she's a young woman who discovers that she has magic powers. They're kind of innate, like a sorcerer. She and her brother were adopted by a man and woman, the man of whom their adopted father hates spellcasters. Very dark history, upbringing with something that happened to his parents were basically killed by an evil witch. So he then, when he got older, used to hunt them. He was what was called a mage finder. He used to hunt evil spellcasters. So there's the sort of difficulty of he wants to protect his daughter, but at the same time she's becoming the very thing that he hates, or used to hate. She's mentored by a wizard who again is met with skepticism by other members of the family, as well as her twin brother Blaine. She also has visions. So she can sort of get these visions that happen that suggest that someone's in danger nearby, and so that she can rush off and help people. And this reminded me of the TV show Angel, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer spin-off, with the character, spoilers for Angel, I'm pretty sure it's like 20 years old now. For the character Cordelia, and there was another character before that actually, but Cordelia, who was both in Buffy and then in Angel, she just suddenly gets these visions of somebody in danger, which obviously leads Angel and the rest of the characters to go and save and help this person. Roleplay wise, she comes across as somebody she's young, she's scared, she doesn't know what these powers mean, so she needs a lot of sort of help in that regard, which she has. There's quite a great cast of characters in that book, from, her parents, her brother, the wizard mentor, and also a group of adventurers who help out as well. Stats-wise, she is a complete and utter anomaly. She's described as being like a wizard or a mage, but she can cast spells innately like a sorcerer rather than having a spell book. She's also a cleric to a degree, because she can cast healing spells, but sometimes they backfire. During the events of the novel, she heals some people, and later on it actually hurts them and makes their conditions worse. So that's quite interesting. If you wanted to use a stat block that's already made, I'd maybe consider the Prismari sorcerer stat blocks from Strixhaven. There's a few of those. I only had a quick look, so I don't know if they are how good they would be to expand on, or probably the best thing to do is just homebrew something. If you do this, I would consider giving her the spell Detect Thoughts, because later on she's able to read people's minds and detect their thoughts. That's the name of the spell. Give her the spell of Clairvoyance, but maybe have it that there's no components needed, it happens instantly, there's no distance restriction. And you could do an interesting mechanic with Cure Wounds, where, say, 25% of the time, instead of Cure Wounds, it accidentally acts like the spell Inflict Wounds and does necrotic damage instead of healing HP, something like that. And that opens up the possibility of a quest where she maybe has to find out if she can get this sorted so that she can just only heal people and it not be that they're cured and hurt, or the risk that they could be hurt instead of cured. Number 4, Eia Pax. This is the first person I'm covering who's in a resource I found called Heroes of Light. Similar to Champions of the Mist that I mentioned earlier, Heroes of Light contains a bunch of good leaning NPCs that you can add to your games. Eia is a paladin. She has a warhorse named Bucephalus, not to be confused with Strahd's Nightmare Steed, also called Bucephalus. She's from Mordant, but was raised in Tempest. She's described as being confident at the risk of coming across as quite arrogant, even if she doesn't necessarily mean to be. She acts as a true general in the battlefield, and she tries her best in everything she does in and out of combat, and she respects people who do the same and isn't a fan of people who don't, essentially. Adventures-wise, she's known to have been in Darkon and Falkovnia, so you could potentially add her there. On the Falkovnia front, maybe she joins helps out with the zombie sieges. Otherwise, a good place to add her could be the Circle, the group of knights known for being in the Shadowlands. That could be a really good place for her. And her current sketch says she's actually trying to train undead hunters. So maybe you put her somewhere where they come across people being trained and she's the one training them. Stat block-wise, I would consider Knight from the Monster Manual. Number 5, the Lamplighters. So this is another one where it's 2 people in one. The Lamplighters are basically a law enforcement agency in Mordant that ensure public safety. They are mentioned in Gazetteer number 3, and there's only a few of them named, but the 2 people who started it are Sheriff Owen Finhanen and Sir Samuel Koss. So essentially a sheriff and a nobleman. But one thing I like about this is this could make things interesting in Mordant. My version of Mordant is very peaceful. It's an open domain, the borders aren't closed. It's probably one of the safer domains as domains go. My players have been through there a few times now and they've not had come across the Darklord yet, who's basically mostly been dormant. And I like the idea that ghosts, Mordant's thing is ghosts, but maybe a lot of the people who live in Mordant aren't, they like a good ghost story, but they've never seen a ghost, and so when they hear stories of actually supernatural things happening, it's quite shocking and surprising. And I did a thing in my game where when they first went to Van Richten's shop in Mordant, they had to help the weathermay-foxgrove twins fight off Natalia, the werewolf, and Alciometus of Darkon, who's a vampire, and her vampire spawn. And there was an NPC who was with them, walking with them, and she's like, "What's going on? Who are those people?" And then after the fight, she was like, "Oh my goodness, what was that?" This is completely alien to them. Like, what's a werewolf? What's a vampire kind of thing? And then I very briefly introduced the Lamplighters, where the 2 of them came and sort of asked the weathermay-foxgrove twins, what's going on? What are all these dead bodies in the street, which are the defeated vampire spawn, at least one of the werewolves. And I kind of like the idea that they are maybe, it's that classic trope of they ensure public safety from a non-supernatural point of view. So they're used to just sorting out bandits and pirates and pickpockets and that kind of thing. So when it comes to things like ghosts and stuff, they're like, what is going on? And maybe there's opportunities where Van Richten and weathermay-foxgrove twins, because whenever some ghost-related stuff happens, those guys are involved, that they start having the finger pointed at them and they get blamed. An adventure possibility could be that the PCs have to vindicate, rescue the weathermay-foxgrove twins who've been imprisoned by the Lamplighters because of all the stuff that's going on, and they've had the blame, even though ironically they're the ones trying to help with these issues. Stat block wise, I guess you consider something like the spy stat block, although I use the spy stat block for Alnwick Ray, Arthur Cedric, as it's suggested in Van Richten's guide. Maybe just noble. Maybe you don't have them overly strong. I think they're described, the one guy is described as being like an old man, I think, so maybe noble is something that works well. Number 6, Patrick Connor, also from Heroes of Light, which I mentioned earlier. My favourite thing about Patrick Connor is that in the description for him, he's described as having an unassuming appearance. And then you look at the art and you're like, oh my goodness, he's a very handsome man. Now, I'm, straight, but I can appreciate a good-looking man, and he looks like a Hollywood superstar. He's even got a scar on his face, for goodness sake. I can see the players, maybe even half the NPCs, completely swooning over him. And not only that, but he is a lycanthrope hunter as well. In the story, in the lore that I found for him, he travels in Verbrek. Now, if I remember correctly, Verbrek doesn't actually appear in Van Richten's guide. It's not one of the domains that got carried across to 5th edition. And he had a companion called Lynette Tharel, who is a elven woman who always wore black, which is quite a cool touch. Role-playing Patrick, he comes across as that kind of cool, brooding, mysterious man kind of thing. I mean, the look gives me that vibe anyway. And there was a really cool detail I said, which, and I quote, his posture and gait suggest a certain similarity to the predators he stalks. I thought that was a really nice detail and puts ideas in my head of how to sort of role-play him based on that. Adventures-wise, because Verbrek isn't in 5th edition, or you could always add it, and for example, Sithicus isn't in 5th edition, but I'm still thinking of adding it to my campaign, you could consider somewhere else where there's heavy lycanthrope activity. I'm thinking Carticus with the werewolves, Richemulu with the werats. Maybe he's found by the PCs and he's considering going after Harkin Lucas or Jacqueline Renier. Maybe an interesting idea could be maybe he's hunting the Keepers of the Feather. Now, the Keepers of the Feather, at least in Barovia, are all were-ravens, but they are good lycanthropes, not evil lycanthropes. Maybe he doesn't know that, though, and he's trying to chase after or capture or kill a member of the Keepers of the Feather, and it's up to the PCs to rescue them and to stop him and realise they are all on the same side, but, so he's not an enemy, but, he's going after one of their friends, potentially, or some of their allies. That could be a nice touch. Stat block-wise, I consider the Veteran from the Monster Manual, but all of his weapons are silvered, including the ammo of his weapon. I think it says in the resource I saw that he has at least 4 silvered weapons on him at all times, so that gives him a long sword, a short sword, a crossbow with silvered crossbow bolts. Maybe give him some other stuff as well. Number 7, Kabe Whippoorwill. Kabe is the one person I'm including from 5th edition. They appear in Ravenloft Misthunters. They appear in most of the modules, but because Kabe's information doesn't appear on Mistipedia because it's 5th edition, there's some 5th edition stuff does appear on Mistipedia, but it's primarily pre-5th edition stuff. I don't think Kabe appears on there at all. So what I'm going to do is, you may not have to buy the bundle. I will link to the bundle in the description below, but if you have access to at least one of these modules, then it should have a decent enough amount of information for Kabe that you can kind of roleplay them based on that. But in some of the Misthunters adventures, Kabe doesn't appear at all, so just be warned, I would stick to this list here. Kabe is described as being an inter-domain scout and works with Alnwick Ray, and that's a good way to introduce Kabe as well. So maybe they meet Alnwick and Alnwick introduces the PCs to Kabe, or vice versa. They're described as having a dark gift that allows them to traverse the domains of dread, but it doesn't say what dark gift that is. But looking at Van Richten's guide, Mistwalker is the one that makes the most sense. so Kabe can travel through the mists and go to domains without needing a mist talisman, so that's a pretty handy thing to have. But the downside is Kabe can't really settle down in one place. They've always got to be on the move. I don't know if it explicitly says this in Mist Hunters. This might be my own headcanon, or maybe I read it somewhere else. I thought Kabe was a member of the Keepers of the Feather. And as I mentioned a few people ago, the Keepers of the Feather include were-ravens. So I pictured Kabe as a were-raven, which I think is quite cool. And more were-ravens the merrier. We've got all the ones that are listed in Curse of Strahd, but I don't know many more beyond that. So I'm a big fan of any more NPC were-ravens I can throw at my players, the more the merrier. Roleplay-wise, Kabe is described as being a Lightfoot halfling, and I quote, with a quick smile and a mean right hook. And I love that. Tells you everything you need to know. And from what I've read about Kabe seems to have a pretty good sense of humour, which quite a macabre sense of humour, which is kind of always appreciated in the Domains of Dread, I think. And they sigh a lot as well. It's like, there'll be a moment where it's just like, wow, that was something. And it'll say Kabe sighed. But other than that, Kabe is mostly a blank slate and a signposter, introducing the PCs to certain domains and certain quests, and almost dropping the PCs off into a domain and being like, right, I'll leave you to it now, see ya, and off they go. So with that in mind, you can kind of put Kabe anywhere. They could be working with Alanic Ray. One cool thing could be maybe they're being hunted by Patrick Connor, who I mentioned earlier. Doesn't like lycanthropes. It's not a coincidence in the banner for this video that I had it where it looks like Patrick is given the side eye to Kabe, as if doesn't trust Kabe, and so that could be an angle where you've got to rescue Kabe from Patrick. That could be really cool. Stat block wise, if you go with my headcanon lore that they are a were-raven, then use the were-raven stat block from Curse of Strahd. I believe there's an alternative version in Candlekeep Mysteries as well. Otherwise, if they are not a were-raven, I would consider something like the Spy stat block from Monster Manual. Number 8, Cian Silverleaf. I think it's pronounced Cian. Cian is an Irish name. I think it's an Irish name for boys. I actually worked with a Cian in an old job of mine, so apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But in this case, it's an elven woman. She appears in Heroes of Light. She is searching for the love of her life, Jacinth Moontide, who also appears in Heroes of Light and has artwork in there. She can't remember where she came from, and I don't think Jacinth does either. And I don't know if it says like how they got separated or that kind of thing, but she does strongly believe that she's from outside the Domains of Dread originally. Roleplay wise, she's described as being intense but beautiful. There's a great quote actually that she's described as being the marriage of a maiden and a storm cloud. That's fantastic. She is described as being outraged by evil. The idea of evil just disgusts her, and she's torn between trying to fight evil but also trying to find Jacinth. And she's got a very brusque demeanour, which I imagine would soften as she gets to know the players. Adventures-wise, Jacinth is described as being a seafarer, so the Sea of Sorrows makes a lot of sense, or anywhere that has port towns such as Darkon, Mordaunt, and so on. Stat block-wise, I was originally going to suggest the Veteran again, but she's described as being quite strong, and that she has a shield. So I was actually going to suggest Gladiator from the Monster Manual, but instead of a spear, swap it out for a sword, because she's described as being really good with the sword. And then because getting rid of the spears removes ranged weapons, I'd consider giving her a crossbow as well. Another option could be the Archer stat block from Vola's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse, but instead of favouring the bow and arrow, which I imagine most of the archers would do, she favours the sword and tries to attack people with melee attacks rather than at range with a bow and arrow. And I would also give her elven traits such as Dark Vision, Magic Can't Put Her to Sleep, and all that jazz. Another option could be to give her one of the drow stat blocks and either make her a drow or remove the drow elements, the innate spells that drows have, and sunlight sensitivity, I think it's called, things like that. And number 9, the last one on our list, I really wanted to include a Vistana in this list, and I've included an honorary Vistana named Nabon. Now in 5th edition it does say that the Vistani welcome non-humans into their ranks. I think traditionally the Vistani in old lore at Ravenloft were almost all human. And I really like this. This was a case of an old lore piece of content saying that the Stone Giant was an honorary Vistana and travelled with the Vistani, and it kind of ties in more to the 5th edition thing, like the fact that Mother Luba is a halfling, and then you could potentially have this Stone Giant in a Vistani group as well. He appears in Heroes of Light, and he travels with 3 other Vistani, Alexei, Nicholas, and Piotr, who are known collectively, the four of them, as the Wanderers. He's from outside the Mists originally. He's got a really grim, sad backstory where I'll keep it succinct, but he was a wanderer. He got shrouded in mist one day and then ended up in unfamiliar lands. He just minded his own business. He was harmless. And one time someone tricked him. They were pretending that they needed help, and so he went to help them, and then he was attacked brutally. Something about broken legs and broken knees. It's awful. This is all in Sithicus, by the way. He was then basically turned into a slave working in a mine, but eventually he was healed of his injuries. Something about the skin of dead Vistani. So essentially, he's got sort of like human or Vistani skin sewn into his own skin. It's pretty grim. Very Ravenloft. And yeah, and then since then he found the other three Vistani and has been travelling around the four of them. Roleplay-wise, once a carefree and harmless traveller, gentle giant type, but maybe with a slight sadness to him, maybe a slight lack of trust, given the horrors that he went through. But I would still kind of have him be like that. I love the idea of the gentle giant trope, but who will do anything to help and protect his friends, or in this case, his Vistani clan. Adventures-wise, he could be travelling with the Vistani. You could add him to a Vistani group, whoever that may be or where they are. They can have a stone giant in their ranks who is there as a protector and that kind of thing. And stat block wise, I keep it simple and consider the stone giant. There are some variants in some of the books. He's described as having a fragment of a magic weapon called Guard, which is a cudgel. I think it's from the Black Rose novels, the Lord Soth Ravenloft novels. But he's only got part of it, and in his size body, it's essentially the size of a dagger, but it's essentially a magic club to a non-giant sized person. So I'd consider giving that in addition to the great club that he'd have as default. And he likes to hide. His tactics include hiding, using the stone camouflage trait, and throwing rocks at ranged attackers such as dangerous spellcasters. And that's it. That's the 9 people, or groups of people if we consider that 2 of them are pairs, that you could consider adding from old lore, or one being 5th edition, but not Van Richten's guide, that you consider adding to your campaigns. I was going to do an honourable mentions list, but then I had a brainwave. Why don't I do a part 2, where I say 9 more good people to add to your campaign? And I'm thinking of doing a 8 more minor villains one, because I've had a few people. I can't believe I forgot Jacqueline Monteri, I think she's called, from To Sleep with Evil, one of the novels. I didn't include George Weathermay in this, who gets a brief mention in Van Richten's guide, uncle of Laurie and Jennifer, weathermay-foxgrove, because I don't know enough about him and I didn't want to shoehorn him into this and not do him justice. So I might do another video, a part 2 of these, where I cover him and a few more. So if you want to see that in the future, please consider subscribing. I have a terrible habit of not saying to people, please subscribe, please like the video and stuff, so I should really get into the habit of doing that. But if you want to see the future, part 2, minor villains, and part 2, good NPCs from old lore, please subscribe and maybe hit the bell icon or whatever it is, and you'll be notified of when those are ready. There's some people I will give dedicated videos to as well. For instance, I did a dedicated video about Esmeralda Davonair, dedicated video about Jan the Sunstar. I plan to do a dedicated video for Gondogal, who I did mention in my Folkovnia video, but I want to expand on that some more and talk about him more. And I want to do weathermay-foxgrove twins as well. Jennifer has travelled with my players for a while now, so I feel like I've got a good grip on her roleplay wise, and her stat block I've made quite interesting, so I'd like to do a video covering them. And that's it for this one. So some of the NPCs I talked about are options in one of my DM's Guild resources called the Second Tarokka Reading, which essentially points players to magic items and a fated ally spread throughout the Domains of Dread. It's a good way of giving purpose and direction to a domain hopping campaign, and that's how my players ended up with Jennifer weathermay-foxgrove as an ally. I think the Nuikin brothers, Elaine, and 1 or 2 others, Brother Dominic maybe. Some of the ones I mentioned earlier in this video are included in that, so you might want to check that out. As I record this, it's still pay what you want, but I might change it to be fixed price. So if you want to get it for free or at a lower price, now's the time to grab it. Next video is coming up. I'm going to do my part 2 of Forlorn. As I record this, I'm still running Castle Tristan Noira, and so I'll wait until that's finished before doing that video, and I'll talk just about how to run Castle Tristan Noira, which is a beast of a castle. And sometimes some of the rooms have 2 or 3 possible descriptions for them, depending on how they're visited. But I won't say any more about that. We'll wait until that video comes along. Thinking of doing a video talking about all the Ravenloft novels I've read. I've obviously touched upon a few in this video and given my thoughts on what I thought of them. I've read most of them, all those are available on Kindle, plus I'm trying to read a couple more beyond that. And I recently got Tome of Beasts, and I would love to do a video where I say, here are 10, for example, monsters from Tome of Beasts that work well in a Ravenloft campaign, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you, Mr. Wanderers.